A black man in a doorman's old wool coat carried his sleeping granddaughter into the finest hotel in Memphis. A little after 1 in the morning, her cheek against his collarbone, a small carved sparrow closed inside her fist. He asked for a room. The young man behind the front desk looked at the coat, looked at the sneakers, looked at the child, and then he smiled the way people smile when they have already decided the answer. And he said, loud enough that the couple at the lobby bar turned to watch, "Sir, I'm going to be honest with you. This really isn't the kind of place for somebody like you. Somebody like you." 9 minutes later, that same clerk had a room ready, key cards printed, a bottle of sparkling water on the house, all of it handed across the marble to a couple in weekend cashmere who had strolled in off Front Street with no reservation at all. And when the old man asked, quietly, to speak with a manager, he was told there was a policy about loitering in the lobby, told that security had already been called, and steered toward the revolving door in front of 40 strangers who had no idea that the man being walked out into the river fog owned the marble under his feet, the brass on the doors, the chandelier over their heads, and the paycheck of every single person wearing that hotel's uniform. Before the sun came up over the Mississippi, 2 people would lose their jobs. One would be handed the honor of his life, and a 6-year-old would ask a question that no adult in that lobby was brave enough to answer. If you have ever stood in a room and felt a stranger measure you in half a second and find you wanting, then stay with me tonight. This whole story is for you. But before I take you into that lobby, I need to take you somewhere else first. Because to understand why a man could stand there so still, so calm, while a stranger told him he was not the right kind of person, you have to understand who taught him how to stand. And that means going back a long way to a smaller hotel on a colder street and a man in the very same coat. Let me tell you about Ezra Holloway. Ezra was born in a shotgun house in South Memphis in a year when the water in his part of town still came from a shared pump at the end of the block. He was the 4th of 7 children, and by the time he was 11, he was already working, hauling ice and sweeping the floor of a barber shop for tips. And by the time he was 19, he had landed what everybody on his street agreed was a good job. He became a doorman, not just any door. The door of the Hotel Ambassador, the grandest hotel in the city in those years. 12 stories of pale stone on Union Avenue with a marble lobby and a ballroom where the cotton money danced. Ezra Holloway stood at that door for 31 years. 31 years of Memphis summers that turned the sidewalk into a griddle, and Memphis Januaries that came howling off the river. And Ezra stood out there in the same wool coat and the same white gloves and opened that door for every soul who came through it. And he tipped his cap, and he said good evening, and he carried their bags. Here is the thing you need to sit with, the thing that made Ezra who he was, and made his son who he became. For most of those 31 years, Ezra Holloway was not permitted to walk through the front of the very hotel he served. He came in through the service alley on the north side, past the loading dock and the grease traps, and he changed into his uniform in a basement room with a bare bulb. And then he went up and stood at a door he could hold open for other men, but could not walk through as a guest himself. They would rent him a coat. They would not rent him a bed. And the men who tipped him a nickel and never once learned his name had a habit, in those days, of calling every black porter and every black doorman by the same single name, whether it was his or not, as if the men holding the doors were too interchangeable to bother knowing apart. 31 years is a long time to hold a door for people who will not learn your name. I want you to hold that number the way Ezra's son held it his whole life, because it is the beam the whole house is built on. Ezra married a woman named Marguerite, and Marguerite cleaned rooms in that same hotel, made the beds she would never be allowed to sleep in, folded the towels, hummed low to herself so the guests would not hear. They were a matched pair, those two, the doorman and the housekeeper, and they were the proudest people their son ever knew. Not proud in the loud way. Proud in the quiet, unbreakable way, the way of people who have decided that the world's opinion of their worth is simply the world's mistake and none of their concern. They had one child born late, a boy they named Cyrus, after the king in the old scripture who set the captives free. Cyrus Holloway grew up in a 2-room house with a picture of Dr. King on the wall and a Bible on the table that his mother read out loud every night, worn soft at the edges from her thumbs. He grew up on gospel and grits. and the particular gravity of a house, where both parents came home tired from serving people who looked straight through them. And he grew up watching his father do a thing that he would not understand until he was a grown man himself. Every evening before his shift, Ezra Holloway would sit at the kitchen table with a pocket knife and a small block of soft basswood, and he would whittle. He made little birds, sparrows, mostly plain brown sparrows with folded wings, and he gave them away to the children on the block, and he kept a few on the windowsill. And when Cyrus once asked him why sparrows of all the birds, his father set down the knife and said something the boy would carry to his own grave. "Because the sparrow is the cheapest bird there is, son. Nobody counts a sparrow. And the old hymn says God's got his eye on every last one of them anyway. So I figure if the Lord bothers to keep count of a sparrow, then nobody down here gets to tell me I don't count either. Nobody counts a sparrow. And yet, his mother taught him the counting of a different kind. Every night, after the supper dishes were dried and set back in the cupboard, Marguerite Holloway would open that soft-edged Bible on the kitchen table and read aloud in a low, steady voice. And she would make Cyrus read too, stumbling over the long words until the long words stopped being hard. She had never finished school herself. She had gone to work cleaning rooms at 14, so her younger brothers could stay in theirs. But she could recite whole chapters from memory, and she told her son more than once that a person who could read and a person who could pray was a person nobody could ever fully own, no matter how they treated him at the door. On Sundays, the two of them and Ezra, when his shift allowed, sat in the third pew of a small brick church in South Memphis with a leak in the roof and a choir that could rattle the windows, and Cyrus grew up understanding grace as a thing you sang loud on a hard morning, not a thing you were handed on an easy one. There was one Sunday he never forgot. He was 9 and a well-dressed usher at a bigger, finer church downtown, a church his mother had wanted to visit just once, had looked at the Holloways' worn shoes and their careful, homemade clothes and had steered them, politely, firmly, toward the back row by the door, the row nobody wanted, where you could feel the cold draft every time somebody came in. Marguerite had said nothing. She had simply taken her son's hand and sat where she was put, and sung every hymn louder than anyone in the building. But on the walk home, she had knelt down on the sidewalk to Cyrus's height, and she had said a thing that lodged in him for life. "Baby," she said, "they can decide where you sit. They cannot decide who you are. That is the one thing in this whole world that is yours and yours alone, and you do not ever hand it to a man at a door. Do you hear me? You keep it." He heard her. He kept it for 50 years. Cyrus was 17 the winter his father's heart gave out. It happened in the service alley of the Hotel Ambassador, on the cold concrete by the loading dock, 20 minutes before the start of a shift. And by the time anyone found him, the snow had already started to settle on the shoulders of that wool coat. The hotel sent a card. They did not send anyone, and they docked the half-shift Ezra had not lived to finish. At the funeral, in a small church in South Memphis, with a leak in the roof and a choir that could shake the walls, Cyrus Holloway made a promise. He did not make it out loud, and he did not make it to the crowd. He made it standing over his father's casket, in that borrowed suit, with his mother's hand shaking in his, and the promise had only one sentence in it. "One day I am going to own a place like the one that used every good year you had, and never once let you sit down in it. And when I do, nobody who walks through my door is ever going to be made to feel the way they made you feel." He kept the coat, the wool doorman's coat, worn thin at the elbows, the brass buttons gone dull. He kept it in a cedar box for 30 years, and he wore it from time to time when he needed to remember exactly who he was and exactly why. Now, I know what a promise like that sounds like from a 17-year-old with $2 and a dead father. It sounds like grief talking. It sounds like the kind of thing a boy says at graveside and forgets by spring. But grief in some people does not evaporate. In some people it hardens, and it becomes a spine, and a man carries it around inside himself for the rest of his life like a second skeleton. That is the kind of man Cyrus Holloway became. The climb took 19 years, and there was nothing lucky in it. He started where his father started, holding a door, this time at a rundown motor lodge out by the interstate, the kind of place that rented rooms by the week to people the city had given up on. He worked the overnight desk from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, 6 nights a week. for a wage that did not cover much more than the room he rented and the bus that carried him there. He learned every job in that building because he could not afford to pay anyone else to do a single one of them. So he learned to bleed the boiler and snake the drains and patch the flat roof and balance the ledger by hand at 4 in the morning, under a buzzing light. And he learned, most of all, the one thing his father had known that the grand hotels had forgotten. Hospitality is not marble and chandeliers. Hospitality is the simple, radical act of making a tired stranger feel, the instant they walk in, that somebody was expecting them and is glad they came. I want to give you one night from those years, because it is the night that made him. There was a woman who came to the lodge desk one January, near 2 in the morning, with 2 children asleep in the back seat of a car that was 1/4 of the way to being her home. She could not cover the room. She was $11 short, and she stood there at the counter, counting the same crumpled bills, a third time, with her hands shaking from the cold, and behind her, through the glass, Cyrus could see the 2 little heads, slumped against the frosted window. The rules of the lodge were plain. No money, no room, and Cyrus Holloway, 22 years old and nearly as broke as she was, reached into his own pocket, put $11 of his own into the drawer to close out the till, and gave her the key. He did not make a speech about it. He carried the smaller child in himself, so the mother did not have to wake her. And when she tried to thank him, over and over, he only said the thing his father used to say, the thing he had heard at a kitchen table 1,000 times. You do not have to earn a roof, ma'am. You just have to be tired and out in the cold, and you are both of those. Go on and rest. That is the whole of it right there. That is the entire seed the rest of this story grows out of. A man decides at a counter, at 2 in the morning, that a stranger's dignity is not something she has to pay for at the door. Everything else Cyrus Holloway ever built, 22 hotels and a limestone tower on the river, he built on top of $11 he put in a drawer for a woman whose name he never even learned. He saved after that the way only a poor man knows how to save, which is to say fiercely and joylessly and without a single unnecessary dollar spent. He went without a car for 6 years. He ate the same thing most nights so he would not have to think about it. And somewhere in the middle of all that going, without, he met a young schoolteacher named Coretta Banks, who taught 4th grade at a school not far from the one his mother had cleaned houses to keep him in, and who saw something in the quiet, exhausted, endlessly determined man at the motor lodge desk that the numbers on his bank statement did not begin to explain. She married him when every sensible person in her life told her not to. She kept teaching through the lean years so that his every dollar could go into the dream. And when a foreclosed 30-room motel off Lamar Avenue came up at a county auction, a sad, water-stained place with a busted sign and a reputation, it was Coretta who sat beside him in that folding chair and squeezed his hand and told him to raise the paddle, even though raising it meant signing for a debt that could have swallowed them both whole. It nearly did. I will not pretend to you that the climb was clean. There was a year, the second year, when a burst pipe and a bad winter and a bank that would not extend him, 30 more days had Cyrus Holloway sitting at that same water-stained front desk at 3 in the morning with the ledger open and the terrible arithmetic staring back at him. 1 week, maybe 2, from losing everything he and Coretta had poured their whole young lives into. He did not pray for money that night. He told me once he prayed only for the strength to keep his word to a dead man, no matter which way it fell. And in the morning he did the unglamorous thing, the only thing, which was to get up and repaint another room himself, and plant flowers in the cracked median out front and stand at that door in his father's spirit, and welcome the next tired trucker like the man was royalty. The bank blinked, the season turned, the little motel held, and every guest who slept in one of those 30 rooms got a piece of the same thing that woman in January got. Truck drivers, traveling nurses, families sleeping cheap on their way to somewhere better. Cyrus learned their names, and he remembered them, and he opened the door for every one of them in his father's spirit. That one motel became 2, 2 became a small brand, and over 19 years, one careful acquisition at a time, one renovated building at a time, Holloway Hospitality Group grew into 22 hotels across the American South, from the Gulf up through the Delta, and the crown of it, the one he built new from a hole in the ground rather than bought, was the hotel he named after his mother. The Marguerite. 19 stories of pale limestone on Front Street, looking out over the muddy shine of the Mississippi, with a lobby of honey-colored marble and a jazz trio that played in the bar until 2 in the morning, and a copper cornice that had gone soft green with the river air, and over the revolving doors, carved into the stone where his mother's name deserved to be, the single word that had been her life. He cut the ribbon himself, with his father's old pocket knife folded in his breast pocket, and he stood on that lobby floor in front of 200 new employees, and told them the only thing he needed them to understand. Everyone who walks through these doors gets the full measure of our welcome before they have proven a single thing to us. Not after we read their clothes, not after we decide whether they belong, before. Every person, every time. And if this hotel ever stops munning that, I will tear it down myself and salt the ground. That was 6 years before the night I am telling you about. Cyrus Holloway was 58 years old now. Coretta had passed 2 winters back, a fast and cruel cancer that took her in 5 months, and grief had put more silver in his beard and made him quieter than he already was. His son and daughter-in-law were doctors down in Jackson, and every few weeks Cyrus took his granddaughter for a stretch of days, so the young couple could breathe. And there was nobody on this earth Cyrus Holloway loved the way he loved that little girl. Naima was 6. She had her grandmother Coretta's serious eyes and a gap where her front tooth used to be, and a habit of asking questions that stopped grown adults in their tracks. And she went nowhere, absolutely nowhere, without a small carved sparrow named Pip, a plain brown bird with folded wings that her great-grandfather Ezra had whittled at a kitchen table 40 years before she was born. It had passed down to her through her father, and she had claimed it the way children claim things, completely and forever. She did not know the whole story of the bird. She only knew that it was old, and that it was hers, and that when she was scared, she held it and it helped. Which brings me at last back to that lobby. Cyrus had not planned to stop at the Marguerite that night. He had been down in Oxford visiting a property, and he had Naima with him, and the plan was to drive her back to Jackson before dark. But the fog came up thick off the river, the way it does in the fall. The headlights of the oncoming cars swallowed whole at 40 feet, and Cyrus had made his son a promise never to drive that child tired in weather like that. A promise is a promise. So he took the Front Street exit into downtown Memphis, and he knew exactly where he was going. Here is a habit of Cyrus Holloway's you need to understand, because the whole night turns on it. He did not visit his own hotels the way other owners did, with the general manager warned 3 days ahead and a red carpet, and everybody on their best behavior. He came unannounced in the middle of the night, and he came dressed in his father's coat. Because a hotel, he believed, only tells you the truth about itself when nobody knows the owner is in the room. He wanted to see the Marguerite the way a tired stranger saw it. He wanted to see whether the thing he had carved into the stone over the door was actually true when he was not there to make it true. He would find out. God help him, he would find out. He carried Naima through the revolving doors. A little after 1 in the morning, the river fog rolling in behind them, and the lobby of the Marguerite opened up exactly as he had drawn it 100 times before it ever existed. Warm amber light pooling on the marble, the low gold gleam of the long front desk. A saxophone somewhere off toward the bar, working slow and blue through an old standard. Everything he had built to say to a weary traveler, "You made it, you can put it down now, you are welcome here." There was one clerk on the overnight. His name tag read Landon, and he was maybe 25. In the hotel's charcoal and gold uniform pressed to a knife's edge. A young man who wore the costume of the role far better than he understood the meaning of it. He looked up when Cyrus approached, and something moved across his face. Not a snarl, not open cruelty. Just a small, quiet correction, the look a face makes when the eyes hand the brain a verdict the brain was already leaning toward. He read the worn wool coat. He read the plain sneakers. He read the silver in the beard and the sleeping child, and the fact that there was no rolling suitcase, no leather weekender, nothing on this man that announced money. And he looked back at his screen. "Evening," Cyrus said, low, so as not to wake the girl. "I need a room for tonight. Just the one night. 2 of us, my granddaughter and me. Doesn't have to be anything special. Just somewhere she can sleep." Landon let his eyes rest on the monitor a beat past what the moment required. Then he looked up and he leaned in an inch, and he pitched his voice just loud enough to reach the couple at the bar. "Sir, I'm going to be honest with you. This really isn't the kind of place for somebody like you." The sentence landed in the space between them and hung there, and the terrible thing about it was how gentle it sounded. Not shouted, not spat. Delivered soft and reasonable, the way a man phrases a thing when he wants the humiliation to feel like a simple fact of the weather that nobody in particular decided. A woman at the bar looked over the rim of her wine glass. Cyrus did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the young man. "I'm asking for a room," he said evenly. "That's all I'm asking for." Landon straightened and reached for the tool that every man like him keeps within arm's reach. "I'm sorry, sir. We're fully committed tonight. There's just no availability." "Nothing at all," Cyrus said. It was not quite a question. "I don't need a suite. A standard room is fine. We just need to lie down. Fully booked, sir." The patience in the young man's voice was smooth and rehearsed, the patience of someone who has said this exact thing before and expects to say it again. "There are a couple of other properties down toward the convention center that might be able to help you out." Cyrus stood at that counter and said nothing for a moment. I want to tell you what was happening inside him, because from the outside it would have looked like nothing at all. He was not deciding whether to be angry. He had made his peace with anger a long time ago, in a church basement with a leaking roof, over a casket. What he was doing was listening. He was listening to a young man deliver a rehearsed line with a rehearsed patience, and something cold and certain was turning over in his gut, and it was telling him that this was not one clerk having one bad night. This was a wall that a person does not build in an evening, and you do not learn how tall a wall is by touching one brick of it. So he waited, and not 3 minutes later the revolving door turned behind him. A couple came in out of the fog. The man wore an unstructured navy blazer and no tie, the woman a long camel coat that had cost more than Landon made in a month, and they moved through that lobby like people for whom rooms had always, simply, been available, because in the whole of their lives, rooms always had been. And Landon changed. You could watch it happen. His spine lifted, his shoulders came back, a smile broke across his face that had been nowhere in the building 60 seconds before. "Welcome to the Marguerite," Landon said, warm as the lobby light itself. "Do we have you with us tonight?" They did not. They were walk-ins, precisely and exactly as Cyrus was a walk-in. But inside of 9 minutes, Landon had found a king room on the 12th floor, run a card, printed 2 brass-tagged keys, and set a bottle of sparkling water on the counter with a flourish, on the house, and he slid the whole warm little ceremony across the marble with both hands like he was presenting a gift. Cyrus watched every second of it. He did not say a word. He did not need to. The entire message had been delivered without anyone once saying it out loud, and both men in that transaction understood it perfectly, even if only one of them would ever have admitted what it was. Now I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now, because I think it too every time I tell a story like this. You are thinking, why doesn't he just say it? Why doesn't he lay his own name down on that marble desk like a brick and watch that boy's whole world come apart? And you are right that he could have. It would have taken one sentence. But that is not how a man like Cyrus Holloway had come to walk through the world. He had not built 22 hotels by ending a fight the moment he could win it. He had built them by finding out first exactly how deep the rot ran, so that when he finally cut, he cut all of it, and it did not grow back the day after he left. He needed to see the whole wall. He got his chance to see more of it faster than he wanted. Behind him, another figure had been watching the whole thing from over near the bell stand. An older black man, easily in his 60s, in a doorman's uniform, with a face that had held a great many doors open for a great many people and had learned to keep itself smooth no matter what walked through. His name tag read Clarence, and Clarence Boyd had been standing there through the whole exchange, and Clarence Boyd had seen exactly what it was, because Clarence Boyd had seen it about 10,000 times over the course of his own long life, most of those times aimed at himself. Clarence crossed the lobby, slow, and he did a thing that took real courage, though he made it look like nothing. He came up beside Cyrus, and he tipped his head toward the child, and he said, warm and easy, loud enough for Landon to hear, "This little one looks about wore out. Sir, let me at least get you both a chair and a glass of water while we sort this out." And if these rooms are all spoke for, I know every night manager at every good house within 6 blocks, and I will personally walk you over to one that'll treat you right. It was a small thing. It was also, in that moment, an enormous thing, because a doorman openly extending dignity to a guest his own front desk had just refused is a doorman putting his job on the line. And every person in that lobby who understood the arrangement understood that too. Landon's smile went thin. "Clarence, I've got it handled." "Course you do," Clarence said, mild as milk, and he pulled out a lobby chair for Cyrus anyway, and he brought the water anyway, and he crouched down to the child's eye level with the careful patience of a man who had grandchildren of his own and murmured, "You rest easy, baby. Grown folks are just working some things out." Cyrus looked at that old man for a long moment, and something passed over his face that he could not have named. He did not know yet, could not have known yet, that he was looking at a piece of his own father's story. That would come before the night was through. He settled Naima into the chair against his chest, and he thanked Clarence quietly, and then he turned back toward the desk, because he was not finished. His voice came out level and still, the way deep water is still, not because nothing is moving under it, but because whatever is moving down there has not yet decided to come up. "I'd like to speak with the manager on duty, please." Something flickered behind Landon's eyes and got covered over fast. He picked up the desk phone, murmured a few words, hung up. And Cyrus waited, and while he waited, he looked around the lobby he had built, at the guests in the low leather chairs pretending not to watch, at the jazz still drifting from the bar, at the word carved in the stone over the door with his mother's name on it. And he wondered the way he had wondered before. What happens to a thing you build once you hand it to other people to keep? The manager arrived inside of 2 minutes. His name tag read Grayson Pruitt, and he was somewhere in his late 40s, in a full suit at 1 in the morning, because to a certain kind of man authority is something you keep pressed and buttoned. He had plainly been briefed on the short walk from the back office. You could read it in his stride. He did not arrive with a question in his eyes. He arrived with a verdict already reached. "Sir," Pruitt said, and he set himself down at Landon's shoulder in a way that made the whole geometry of the thing plain. 2 of them on one side of the marble, Cyrus on the other with a sleeping child on his chest, and an old doorman hovering at his back. "I understand there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. My associate has explained that we're at capacity this evening. I'm afraid there's really nothing further we're able to do for you tonight." "There's no misunderstanding," Cyrus said. "I stood right here and watched your associate tell me you had nothing, and then 3 minutes later, book a room for a walk-in couple with no reservation. I'm asking you to explain the difference to me." Pruitt's face set, and it set in that particular way a position hardens when it has been questioned by someone it has already decided not to respect. Our staff exercise their professional judgment about what's appropriate for our clientele and our brand. I stand behind that judgment fully. "Professional judgment," Cyrus repeated slow. "That's correct." And for a long moment, Cyrus Holloway said nothing at all. He was thinking about a service alley on Union Avenue, and snow settling on the shoulders of a wool coat. He was thinking about a man who held a door for 31 years for people who would not learn his name, and a woman who made beds she was never allowed to sleep in, and a promise made over a casket in a church with a leaking roof. He was thinking about his mother's name carved in the stone 20 feet away, and how the whole enormous edifice of everything he had built had grown out of a single refusal, the refusal to accept that any human being is the wrong kind of person to be shown some basic decency. And standing here now in the lobby of his own flagship, with his granddaughter's small heartbeat going against his ribs, he felt that old promise settle over him like something with real weight to it. He was not going to say who he was, not yet, because a wall this smooth, this practiced, a clerk with a rehearsed line and a manager with a conclusion already drawn and security already summoned, a wall like that does not get built in one night. It gets built over months, one turned-away guest at a time, and it gets built because somewhere above these 2 men, somebody decided it was acceptable, or decided not to look. And Cyrus needed to see the true shape and size of it before he touched any of it. That was not weakness. That was the patience of a man who intends to fix a thing all the way to the root. "I'd like your full name and your exact title," he said quietly. For my records. Pruitt gave both, with a thin amusement in it, the way you humor a complaint you have already dropped in the trash. Cyrus noted them the way he noted everything, completely, quietly, without making a show of it. Then he stepped back from the desk, and he sat down in the lobby chair Clarence had pulled out, and he settled Naima against him, and he waited to see what the Marguerite would do next. He did not have long to wait. Pruitt had not gone back to wherever managers go at 1 in the morning. He had planted himself near the desk with his arms folded, and every 90 seconds or so his eyes crossed the lobby to the chair where Cyrus sat, and every time they did, they carried the same short sentence. "You are still here. I would very much prefer that you weren't." Cyrus noticed. He noticed the way Pruitt leaned in and said something to Landon that made the young man's spine go rigid. He noticed Clarence Boyd hovering near the bell stand, no longer smiling, his jaw set, a man clearly deciding how far he was willing to go. He noticed 2 guests at the bar who had gone quiet, their attention drifting his way and then skittering off, unwilling to fully land on him. The whole lobby had taken on a particular texture. Maybe you know the one. It is the texture a room gets when a number of decent people all sense at the same moment that something wrong is happening in front of them, and each of them, for their own private reasons, has quietly decided that it is not their place to be the one who says so. Cyrus had felt that texture in a room before. Not here, not in a building with his own mother's name on it, but in enough other rooms across enough years to know the exact weight of it the instant it arrived. It is the silence of good people who have decided this is not their fight. And if you have ever been the person the whole room was being so carefully quiet about, then you know precisely how loud that silence can get. Pruitt made his move eventually. He crossed the lobby with the measured, chin-lifted stride of a man performing authority rather than actually possessing it. And he stopped a few feet from the chair, and he dropped his voice into that register men use when they want to sound discreet, while making certain everyone nearby can hear. "Sir, I've given you some time, and now I need to be direct with you. This is a private establishment. We've told you we can't accommodate you. Continuing to occupy our lobby after, that isn't something I'm able to permit." Cyrus looked up at him. "I am sitting in a chair holding a sleeping child. I have not raised my voice. I have not disturbed one soul in this room. And I have not done a single thing that gives you cause to move me." "I'm not asking," Pruitt said, and the room shifted. A guest at the bar set his glass down with a small, distinct click. Clarence Boyd took a step forward from the bell stand and then made himself stop. Cyrus looked at Grayson Pruitt's face, at the flat, undisturbed certainty of a man who had never once in his entire life entertained the possibility that he was the one who was wrong. And he felt something settle in his own chest that was older and colder and far more patient than anger. "Then call your security," Cyrus said. "I'd like this to be official." Pruitt's jaw tightened. He turned and gave a short nod toward the far end of the lobby, where 2 security men had, it turned out, been standing in the shadow of a column for some minutes already, waiting for exactly that signal. They came across the marble with the unhurried heaviness of men, who do this kind of thing often, and they set themselves down on either side of the chair, with the practiced ease of a maneuver they had run many times before. And it was exactly then, with a large man planted on either side of them, that Naima woke all the way up. Children do not wake the way grown people do. They do not swim up slow through the layers. She came back into the world all at once, her eyes open and clear, and she took the whole of it in with a single sweep, the 2 big men, the tension gone stiff in her grandfather's arms, the manager standing over them, the strangers watching from the bar. She sat up straighter against Cyrus's chest, and she pulled the little wooden sparrow tight in her fist, and she looked up at the guard on the left, and then she looked at Grayson Pruitt directly, with the plain, unhidden curiosity of a person who has not yet learned to pretend she does not see what she sees. "Why are you making my grandpa leave?" she asked. Her voice was clear and unhurried, and it carried the particular ringing quality a child's voice has as in a quiet room. It went farther than she meant it to. It reached the couple by the elevator. It reached the guests at the bar. It reached Clarence Boyd at the bell stand, whose eyes had gone bright and wet. Pruitt did not answer her. He looked at Cyrus instead, which was its own kind of answer, and children are far better at reading that kind of answer than adults ever give them credit for. Naima looked at her grandfather, then back at the manager, and she worked at it the way a 6-year-old works at a thing that will not line up right. "If you don't want us here," she said, slowly, "then why do you work here? Isn't your whole job to help people who come in?" There was no accusation in it. You have to understand that. She was not scoring a point. She did not know there were points to be scored. It was the honest bewilderment of a small child watching grown adults do a thing that simply does not add up. And there is nothing on this earth more disarming than that. But an honest question, asked plainly, in a quiet room, has a way of landing harder than anything a lawyer could have written on a legal pad. The couple by the elevator had turned all the way around now. The guest at the bar had stopped pretending to look elsewhere. Even the guard on the left shifted his weight, and something crossed his face that said he did not much want to be standing where he was standing. Have you ever noticed that about children? How one of them can walk into a room full of adults who have all quietly agreed not to see a thing, and simply say the thing out loud, and the whole careful arrangement falls to pieces. We spend our entire lives learning how not to see. It takes a 6-year-old about 4 seconds to undo all of it. Cyrus looked down at his granddaughter. He kept his voice level and warm, the way he always did when he needed her to understand that the disorder of the world was not her doing. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby. Not one single thing." He held her serious eyes until she nodded, and then he straightened and looked back up at Pruitt, and something in his own face had gone very quiet and very final. Pruitt's certainty had cracked, but it had not cracked into doubt. It had cracked into irritation. The child's question had pulled the whole room's attention exactly where he did not want it, had turned the temperature of the place against him in a way he could not instantly repair. And men like Grayson Pruitt, when they feel the grip beginning to slip, do not loosen their hand. They squeeze. "This has gone on long enough," Pruitt said, and every last trace of hospitality dropped out of his voice. He looked at the guards. Escort them out now. And that was the moment Clarence Boyd stepped all the way forward. "No, sir," Clarence said. His voice was not loud, but it stopped the room. "I'm sorry, Mr. Pruitt, I truly am, and I know what I'm risking to say it. But I have opened that door out there for near on 30 years, and I have watched a lot of people walk through it, and I know a decent man when I'm standing next to one. This man has done nothing. That is a baby in his arms, and I am not going to stand here in this uniform and watch us put them out into the fog. If that costs me my job, then it costs me my job. But I'd rather lose the job than lose the thing my job is supposed to be about." Silence, real silence, the kind that comes down over a room one sound at a time. Pruitt's face went a mottled red. He opened his mouth to fire the old man where he stood. Cyrus Holloway rose from the chair. He rose slowly, carefully, keeping Naima gathered against him, and he did not resist and he did not raise his voice. But he did not move toward the door either. He stood in the center of the lobby he had built, with his granddaughter in one arm and the old doorman at his shoulder, and he looked at Grayson Pruitt the way a man looks at something he has, finally, after a long, patient hour, seen all the way to the bottom of. Phones had come out around the room, not held up high, not brandished, but angled, discreet. The way people record a thing they can feel is wrong and want to keep proof of. Picture what those little screens were capturing. An old black man in a worn doorman's coat. A 6-year-old girl with a gap in her teeth and a wooden bird in her fist. An old black doorman standing beside them with his chin up. 2 uniformed guards, and a manager whose face had decided how this ended before the man had ever reached the desk. It is a photograph, that. A photograph the whole world has seen 1,000 times and will click on 1,000 more, because everyone watching already knows exactly which way it is supposed to go. Cyrus reached into the inside pocket of his father's coat and took out his phone. He found a name near the top of his favorites, and he pressed it, and he lifted it to his ear. The call lasted under a minute. He said 4 sentences, low and even. He listened for a few seconds. Then he ended the call, slid the phone back into the coat, and rested his free hand on the old doorman's shoulder. "Grandpa," Naima whispered, just for him, "do we have to go?" He looked down at her, and for the first time all night, something in his weathered face softened completely. "No, baby," he said. "We are not going anywhere tonight." Pruitt heard it, and it was the last of his patience. He took a step forward. "Sir, I am telling you for the final time." The elevator chimed. It is a small sound. That lobby made it 40 times a night, and no one ever turned a head. But every single person in that room turned toward this one, because everything else had gone so still that the chime rang out like a struck bell. The doors slid open and Renata Poole stepped out. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, in a dark suit she had plainly pulled back on in a hurry, the chief executive officer of Holloway Hospitality Group. Two more people from the corporate floor came out of the elevator behind her, both moving with the tight, contained speed of people who understand precisely what they are walking into and precisely how bad it is going to be. Renata Poole crossed the marble directly toward the man in the doorman's coat. She did not so much as glance at Pruitt. She did not glance at Landon. She looked at Cyrus with the particular stricken expression of a person who has just realized she has failed someone she is sworn to serve. And she stopped in front of him, and she said with a formality that carried real weight in it, "Mr. Holloway, I am so sorry that you were kept waiting." The lobby went silent, not the dramatic, all-at-once silence of a movie. The real kind. The kind that arrives one sound at a time, until there was nothing left in that whole grand room but the saxophone still drifting from the bar, playing something slow and blue that had gone suddenly and completely wrong for the moment it was scoring. Renata Poole turned and faced the front desk. Her voice stayed level, which somehow made it land harder than any shout could have. "For everyone in this lobby who does not know," she said, "this is Cyrus Holloway. He is the founder and the sole owner of Holloway Hospitality Group. He owns this hotel. He owns the marble you are standing on, and the uniforms you are wearing, and the contract that decides whether either of you works here tomorrow." She let that sit for exactly one breath. "His mother's name is carved into the stone over the door you were about to throw him out of." Landon had gone the color of the marble behind him. Grayson Pruitt had not moved. He stood rooted in the middle of the lobby floor, in the particular stillness of a man whose entire understanding of the last hour has just been demolished and rebuilt around him, and who has not yet worked out how he is supposed to stand inside the new version of it. Naima looked up at the silver-haired woman, then at her grandfather, then back at the woman. She pulled Pip a little tighter and leaned into Cyrus's chest. "Grandpa," she whispered, "do they work for you?" And Cyrus Holloway looked down at his granddaughter, and he put his arm around her, and for the first time since the revolving door had turned behind them, the weight came off his shoulders all at once. "Yeah, baby," he said. "They work for me." Nobody moved. That was the thing Cyrus noticed most in the seconds after Renata Poole stopped speaking, the total absence of motion in a room that 90 seconds earlier had been building toward something loud and certain. Pruitt was frozen to the floor. Landon had both hands flat on the mahogany as if he needed it to keep himself upright. The two security men had already stepped back without being told to, some instinct in them creating distance, from a situation that had changed its entire shape under their feet. Even the guests who had been recording had let their phones drift down, caught between the urge to capture it, and the sense that whatever was happening now asked for something more than a screen held up between them and it. Cyrus looked at the room. He looked at each face in turn. And I want to be clear with you about this, because it is the whole point. There was no triumph in it. He was not a man who had just won something, and wanted to feel the pleasure of it. He looked at those faces the way you take inventory, the way a builder walks a damaged house, deciding what has to be torn out and what can be saved. He was not thinking about what he wanted to say. He was thinking about what this moment actually was, and what it was going to require of him, because a moment like this one can be spent two ways, and only one of those ways builds anything that lasts. Pruitt found his voice first, which was either brave or foolish, and this being Grayson Pruitt was probably both. "Mr. Holloway, I want to explain. We had no possible way of knowing who you were. This wasn't personal. It was simply a matter of..." Every sentence set out full of confidence and ran dry before it could reach a period. He was not lying, exactly. He truly had not known who this man was. But Cyrus had spent enough of his life in enough rooms to understand that not knowing is not remotely the same thing as not being responsible, and somewhere underneath the scrambling, Pruitt understood that too. It was the reason none of his sentences could find their endings. Cyrus let him run all the way out. He did not interrupt. He did not shift his expression. He did not give the man one single thing to push against. And when the words finally stopped coming, he spoke. You're right, Cyrus said. You had no way of knowing who I was. And that is the entire point. His voice carried the length of the lobby without any effort at all, not because he raised it, but because everything else had gone so quiet. Everything you did tonight, you did because you looked at me and decided I was not worth your standard. Not because of a word I said. Not because of a single thing I did. Because of the coat I had on when I came through that door. And you did it in front of my grandbaby. Pruitt opened his mouth. Cyrus went on, still level, still unhurried, at the pace of a man reading from something written on his own bones. Let me tell you whose coat this is. This coat belonged to my father. His name was Ezra Holloway, and he held the door of a grand hotel in this city for 31 years. Same as your doorman there. He stood out in the cold and the heat in this exact coat, and he opened that door for every soul who came through it. And for most of those 31 years, they would not let him walk through the front of that hotel as a guest. They rented him the coat. They would not rent him a bed. And half the men who came through his door never once bothered to learn his name. I built this company so that would never be the thing that greeted a man at my door. I built it so that the person standing in front of your desk gets their dignity before they have proven one single thing to you. Not after you have read their clothes. Not after you have decided whether they fit your brand. Before. That word is carved into the stone over the door, right under my mother's name. And you looked at a tired man holding a sleeping child, and you decided that word did not apply to him. He looked at Renata Poole, who gave a single short nod, and then he looked back at Grayson Pruitt. You did not fail a guest tonight. You failed every single person who has ever walked through a door like this one, and been made to feel that they had to earn the right to be inside it. You failed my father, 30 years in the ground, and you did it in front of my grandbaby, who is 6 years old, and who is going to remember tonight for the rest of her life. The only question left is what she remembers about how it ended. Pruitt tried one more sentence. It did not get far. Mr. Pruitt, Cyrus said, and it was almost gentle. You are terminated effective immediately. He looked at Renata Poole, who had already stepped aside to make the call to HR, and Grayson Pruitt's face settled into something gray and inward. Whatever argument he still had left in him, he chose not to spend it. He tugged his suit jacket straight once, the small automatic gesture of a man reaching for the last unbroken piece of his own dignity, and he turned and walked toward the back office, without another word. Now, if this were an ordinary story, that would be the end of Grayson Pruitt. The bad man loses his job, the credits roll, and everybody feels a little bit lighter on the drive home. But I told you at the start that Cyrus Holloway was not a man who ended a fight the moment he could win it. And I told you he had a promise to keep that was 30 years old and carved into his bones. Firing one manager does not keep a promise like that. Firing one manager treats the symptom and leaves the disease. Cyrus had felt it standing at that desk, felt it in his gut like a cold stone, that this was never one man's bad night. This was a wall. And here is the thing about a wall, the thing that men like Grayson Pruitt always forget. A wall leaves a paper trail. The next morning, before the fog had even fully burned off the river, Cyrus Holloway sat in a conference room on the corporate floor of the Marguerite with Renata Poole, the regional director of operations, and the head of the company's internal audit team. He did not raise his voice, and he did not slam a table. He asked one quiet question. He asked to see the room availability logs for the property, going back a full year. Here is what a hotel's property management system does not know how to do. It does not know how to lie. Every room, every night is time-stamped in the system the instant its status changes. Available, held, blocked, sold. And with every one of those changes, it records the exact minute and the exact user who made it. So when they pulled the log for the night before and put it up on the screen, there it was, in numbers that could not be argued with. At 1:07 in the morning, under Landon's login, 3 standard rooms on the 9th floor had been manually switched from available to out of order, maintenance hold. At 1:23 in the morning, under that same login, one of those exact rooms had been switched right back to available and sold, at rack rate, to a walk-in couple. No maintenance ticket had ever been filed for those rooms. No engineer had ever been dispatched. Nothing had ever been broken. The rooms had simply been made to vanish for 16 minutes, for one specific guest, and then quietly brought back to life for another. That is what a paper trail looks like. 16 minutes in black and white with a name attached. And once Cyrus had it, he pulled the threads. And the whole thing began to come apart in his hands. Because that little trick with the availability was not a one-night invention. When the auditors ran the same query back across the previous 8 months, the same pattern surfaced again and again. Rooms blocked and unblocked inside tight little windows, always on the overnight shift, always with no maintenance ticket to match, always Gressison Pruitt was the manager on duty. And when the audit team cross-referenced those windows against the hotel's guest relations inbox, they found the other half of it. Complaints. 9 of them, over those 8 months, from guests who had been turned away in the small hours and who had later written in, and who had each been told, in a smooth and apologetic reply, that it had been an honest error, a full house, a glitch in the booking system. Every one of those 9 complaints had been received, acknowledged, and closed within 24 hours by the same manager. Closed. Buried. Never once escalated to corporate, which was exactly what company policy required, and which Grayson Pruitt had known and had deliberately chosen to ignore. You want to know how a wall actually gets built? That is how. Not with one cartoon villain and a spotlight on him. It gets built with a small, quiet, dishonest habit, repeated on the overnight shift where nobody is watching, and a manager willing to sit on the evidence, and 9 human beings who wrote in, got a soft little apology, and were never heard from again. 9 people. 9 tired travelers, each one told they were the wrong kind of person for a room that was standing empty the whole time. And if a 6-year-old had not asked one honest question in a quiet lobby, it would have been 10, and then 11. And the log would have just kept right on scrolling. Cyrus did not call a press conference. That was never who he was, and it was never the point. What he did was quieter and far heavier than any press conference. He had the legal team reopen every one of those 9 buried complaints and reach out to every single one of those guests personally. Not with a coupon. With a phone call and an apology in Cyrus Holloway's own name and a standing open invitation to the house. He had the internal auditors formally flag the concealment of guest relations complaints as a compliance failure that reached up past Grayson Pruitt to the regional oversight that was supposed to catch exactly this kind of pattern and had somehow never caught it. And within a month, 2 more people up that chain of command found their own roles under review. And because a hotel in the United States is what the law calls a place of public accommodation, and because turning a person away from one on the basis of who they are is not merely rude but is a violation of Title II of the Civil Rights Act, Cyrus had every one of those 9 guests told, plainly and honestly, what their rights were, and offered them the full cooperation of the company if any of them chose to act on those rights. He did not hide behind the corporation. He took the full weight of the corporation, and he turned it around and pointed it back at the thing the corporation had allowed to happen inside its own walls. That is the difference between revenge and a reckoning. Revenge only wants the bad man to hurt. A reckoning wants the wall itself to come down, brick by documented brick, so that it can never be quietly rebuilt again the day after everyone stops watching. Cyrus Holloway was not interested in revenge. He never had been. He was interested in tearing down the wall. Grayson Pruitt did not go quietly, of course. Men like Grayson Pruitt rarely do, and the reason they do not is the very same arrogance that undid them in the first place. 3 days after the termination, a letter arrived from a lawyer he had hired, a stiff and expensive-sounding letter that spoke of wrongful termination and defamation, and the damage done to his client's spotless professional reputation, and it demanded a settlement and a signed statement clearing his name. It landed on the desk of the company's general counsel, a careful woman named Adieze Okonkwo, and Cyrus asked her to handle it, and she did, in a single meeting that lasted less than half an hour. I would have paid good money to be in that room, because Grayson Pruitt walked into it, still believing he was the wronged party, still believing the whole thing had been a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand, still, at the bottom of it, unable to imagine that the tired man in the doorman's coat had actually been in the right. And the general counsel did not argue with him. She did not raise her voice. She simply opened a folder and slid 3 things across the table, one at a time, and let them do the talking, exactly the way the man's own dead father would have. The first was the room availability log. 1:07 in the morning, 3 rooms blocked, no maintenance ticket. 1:23, 1 room sold to a walk-in couple. Pruitt's own login was not on it, but his was the signature on the shift manager's report that had certified the property was at full occupancy that night. A report the log proved to be false, a report he had signed. The second was the query going back 8 months, the same little pattern repeating like a stutter, always on his watch. And the third was the guest relations file, 9 complaints. Received, acknowledged, and closed, every one of them inside 24 hours by his hand, in direct violation of a written company policy requiring escalation. A policy that carried his own initials at the bottom, acknowledging that he had read and understood it on the day he was promoted. The general counsel let all of it sit on the table between them. Then she said quietly that the company had no intention of defaming anyone, because the company had no intention of saying anything at all that was not documented, time-stamped, and true. She said that a reference, if any future employer called for one, would consist of his dates of employment and nothing more. And she said that the company had considered, given the pattern and given the buried complaints, whether it had an affirmative obligation to disclose what it had found to the guests who had been harmed under Title II of the Civil Rights Act, and had concluded that it did, and had already begun doing so. Then she asked whether his attorney still wished to proceed with the demand. Pruitt's lawyer asked for the room. When Pruitt came back out, the demand had been withdrawn. And here is the part I do not want you to miss. The part that separates this from a simple story about one bad man getting what was coming to him. The reckoning did not stop at Grayson Pruitt, it went up. Because a manager does not bury 9 complaints over 8 months in a company that is actually watching. The whole point of the escalation policy was that corporate was supposed to see those complaints. And when the audit team traced the failure upward, they found a regional director who had received the summary reports, glanced at the numbers, seen a flagship property turning a healthy profit, and never once asked the obvious question about why a full hotel kept turning tired travelers away in the middle of the night. He had not built the wall, but he had walked past it every day and decided not to look at it. And at Holloway Hospitality Group, after that night, deciding not to look was no longer a thing a person got to keep their job for doing. He was gone inside the month, and the oversight structure that had let a single manager operate in the dark for the better part of a year was rebuilt from the studs. That is what tearing down a wall actually looks like. It is slow, and it is documented, and it is deeply unglamorous, and almost none of it ever ends up in the video that goes around the world. But it is the only kind of justice that does not grow right back the moment the cameras leave. Landon, the young clerk, was a different matter, and Cyrus took his time with it. That morning he found the young man in the break room, gray-faced, unable to look up from the table, and Cyrus sat down across from him, and he did not raise his voice at all. "You made a decision about a human being last night based on the coat he had on," Cyrus said. "I want you to sit with that, not with what it cost you this morning, with what it means. I want you to sit with what it actually feels like to be the one standing on the other side of that desk. Hold little sleeping child, being told by a stranger that you are not the right kind of person to be given a place to sleep." Landon started to apologize, the words tumbling and overlapping. Cyrus let him finish. Then he said, "I am not going to end your career over one night. You are 25 years old. You learned this from somewhere, and somebody along the way let you keep it. And that is a failure that belongs to more people than just you. But you are going into a program, not a skills course, a values course. You are going to spend real time, paid time, understanding what this work actually is and exactly who it is for. And part of that program is that you are going to spend a week working alongside Clarence Boyd, who tried to do the right thing last night at real risk to himself, while you were doing the wrong thing at no risk at all. You are going to watch how that man treats people, and if you come out the far side of all that, and you still want to wear this uniform, then the door is open. But last night does not happen again. Not on my floor, not to anyone." Landon nodded. It was a small movement. But it was real, and something in the young man's face had cracked open in a way that might, given time, let something better grow. And then Cyrus Holloway went to find the old doorman. "I have been waiting the whole story to tell you this part, and now it is time. Cyrus found Clarence Boyd out front, at the door, because of course that is where Clarence Boyd was, tipping his cap to a departing guest, holding the door the way he had held 10,000 doors across a long and mostly unthanked life. And Cyrus asked him quietly how long he had been holding hotel doors in this city, and Clarence, who did not yet fully understand who he was talking to, told him. Near on 40 years all told, and Cyrus asked him where he had started. And Clarence Boyd smiled a slow, faraway smile, and he said he had started as a boy, a bag runner and a shoe shine, at the old Hotel Ambassador up on Union Avenue, back before they tore it down, and that he had learned everything he knew, everything he had ever known about how to treat a soul who came through a door, from one man. An old doorman there, who had taken a scared young boy under his wing when nobody else would, and had shown him how to stand up straight in a coat, and how to keep his dignity in a building that was doing its level best to strip it off him, and who used to sit in the break room on his supper hour, whittling little wooden birds out of scraps of basswood and giving them to the neighborhood children. Cyrus Holloway had to put his hand against the cold stone of his own building to keep himself standing. "His name," Cyrus said, and his voice did not come out quite steady. "The man who taught you. Do you remember his name?" "Course I do," Clarence said, surprised anyone would ask. Wasn't a finer man drew breath in this city? Ezra Holloway. His eyes moved to the word carved in the stone over the door, the word he had walked under every working day for years without ever once making the connection, and then they moved to the face of the silver-bearded man standing in front of him in a wool coat, gone thin at the elbows, and Clarence Boyd's own weathered face began, very slowly, to change. "Lord have mercy," the old doorman whispered. "You're his boy. You're Ezra's boy." Cyrus Holloway, who owned 22 hotels and had not wept in public since he buried his wife, reached out and took the old man's hand in both of his own. "He gave you one of the birds, didn't he?" Cyrus said. It was not really a question. "I've still got it," Clarence said, and his voice broke clean in half. 50 years. Kept it on my windowsill 50 years. Now I want you to understand the full shape of what had happened in that lobby the night before, because it is almost too much to hold. The one man in that building who had stood up, at the risk of his own job, to defend a stranger's dignity, the one man who had refused to stay quiet, was a man who had learned every single thing he knew about human decency from the protagonist's own dead father. The seed his father had planted in a break room half a century ago, a little wooden bird pressed into the hand of a frightened boy, had grown, across 50 years and one dark night, into the one act of courage that told Cyrus Holloway everything he needed to know about what his father had really left behind in this world. Ezra Holloway had been dead for over 30 years, and he had still somehow reached across all of it to hold a door open for his own grandchild. Nobody counts a sparrow. And yet, what Cyrus Holloway did in the weeks that followed, he did not do for the cameras, and most of it never made it into the video that eventually went around the world. That video, the one that got the millions of views, it ended at the desk, at the humiliation, at the moment the guards stepped forward. It never showed you the log pulled at dawn. It never showed you the 9 phone calls. It never showed you an old doorman weeping at his own front door over a 50-year-old bird. Because the wound is what the world clicks on. The world almost never stays around to see what a person chooses to build out of the wound. Cyrus built. Clarence Boyd did not spend one more night out in the cold on his feet unless he chose to. Cyrus created a new position at the Marguerite and every flagship in the company, a director of guest welcome, a real title with a real salary, and a seat in the room where the decisions actually got made. And he gave the first one to Clarence, because he needed people in the rooms where things get decided who already knew, all the way down in their bones, exactly where the line was and exactly what it cost to hold it. Clarence tried to refuse. He said he was an old man and a doorman, and that was all. And Cyrus told him that his father had been an old man and a doorman too, and that it was long past time this company started listening to men like them instead of stepping over them. Clarence Boyd took the job. Then Cyrus did something he had never done in 19 years of running the company. He closed the doors of the Marguerite's ballroom, the very ballroom he had built to host the weddings and galas of the city's finest, and he gathered his people into it. Not the executives, the people. He had every property send its housekeepers and its dishwashers and its night auditors and its valets and its line cooks. the ones who are almost never in the room when the important things get said. And he stood up in front of all of them, without a podium and without a prepared speech, in his father's coat, and he told them the whole story. He told them about Ezra and the 31 years, and the service alley on Union Avenue. He told them about a woman who was $11 short one January night. He told them what had happened in that lobby, and he did not soften his own company's part in it. And then he told them the two things he had come to say, the two things that would outlast him. The room was very quiet when he started. It was not quiet when he finished. A housekeeper in the third row, a woman who had made 10,000 beds she would never sleep in, was weeping openly, and she was not the only one. And when Cyrus finished speaking, there was a silence, and then there was a sound that started in the back and rolled forward. The sound of a room full of the people who hold the doors and carry the bags and clean the rooms. Finally, for once, being told out loud that the whole thing was actually about them. Here are the two things. The first was a policy. He had it written into the operating manual of every hotel he owned, and he gave it a name, and the name was the Ezra Standard, after a man that almost none of them had ever heard of, a man who had held a door in this city for 31 years, and been permitted to walk through the front of it as a guest exactly never. The Standard was one sentence long, and a framed copy of it now hangs in the back office of every hotel Cyrus owns, where the staff see it at the start of every shift. Every guest receives the full measure of our welcome before they have proven a single thing to us. Not because of what they are wearing, not because of what they look like, not because of whether they seem to belong, but because they walk through our door. And that is enough. The second thing was a fund. Cyrus put $4.75 million of his own money behind it to start, and he named it the Welcome Table Fund, after the old spiritual his mother used to hum while she made the beds. The one that promises a day when everyone, every last one, gets to sit down together at the welcome table. The fund pays for hospitality training and tuition, and first real jobs for young people, out of the same South Memphis neighborhoods that Ezra and Marguerite and Cyrus himself had come up out of, the blocks where nobody hands you a career, and nobody is ever waiting in the drive with your name on a card. Clarence Boyd sits on its founding board. So do 3 of the 9 guests who had been turned away that year. Guests who, when Cyrus called them personally, told him they did not want a settlement and did not want a coupon. They wanted to make sure it never happened to somebody's grandfather again. The very first class the fund put through its hospitality program was 14 young people out of South Memphis. And one of them was a 19-year-old named Darnell, who had been sleeping some nights in his aunt's car, and who told the intake counselor, plainly, that he had never once in his life been inside a hotel like the Marguerite, as anything but somebody the security might watch. Cyrus made sure that Boyd's first shift was on the front desk of the flagship, in a pressed charcoal and gold uniform, checking in guests under the word carved in the stone. And he made sure the man training him that week was Clarence Boyd. That is not a coincidence, and it is not a small thing. That is a doorman's grandson, so to speak, passing down to a boy from the same streets the exact thing that a whittling old man had once passed down in a break room half a century before. Some seeds take 50 years to come up, but they come up. And the logo of the Welcome Table Fund, the little mark that goes on every letter it sends and every check it writes, is a small brown sparrow with folded wings. 3 months later, on a slow Tuesday afternoon, a family came in through the revolving doors of the Marguerite. 2 parents, road-worn, dressed for comfort and not for anybody's impression, and 2 children trailing behind them, one of them dragging a backpack that was very nearly bigger than he was, and refusing every single offer of help with the total conviction of a small boy who has decided this is a matter of principle. Clarence Boyd saw them come in. He crossed the lobby to meet them before they ever reached the desk, and he introduced himself by name, and he crouched down to the boy's eye level and gravely asked permission to help carry the enormous backpack, which the boy, after a long negotiation, at last granted. Clarence did not look at their shoes. He did not read their luggage. He looked at them, at the tired parents and the stubborn boy, and he smiled the way people smile when they truly mean it. Inside of 2 minutes, the parents' shoulders had come down out of their ears. Inside of 5, the whole tired family had let themselves be welcomed. Across the lobby, near the cold fireplace, Cyrus Holloway stood with Naima beside him. He had come for a scheduled visit this time, in a proper suit instead of his father's coat, though Naima, of course, had brought Pip. They had been standing there 10 minutes, and Cyrus had not announced himself to a single soul, because he wanted to see this first. Not the ribbon-cutting version of the thing he had built. The ordinary Tuesday version. The version that happens when nobody knows the owner is standing in the room. Naima watched Clarence walk the tired family toward the desk. She watched the children light up at something the old doorman said. She watched the stubborn boy finally, gladly, surrender the backpack, and then she looked up at her grandfather. "Is that what it's supposed to look like?" she asked. Cyrus watched the tired parents let out a breath they had been holding since the highway. He watched a little boy let go of the heavy thing he had been so certain he had to carry alone. "Yeah, baby," he said, and his voice was thick. "That is exactly what it's supposed to look like." Naima considered this with the quiet, complete thoroughness she brought to most things. Then she nodded once, and she tucked the little wooden sparrow into her grandfather's coat pocket for safekeeping. And she reached up and took his hand, and the two of them stood together in the corner of the lobby he had built out of a promise and a pocket knife, watching the place finally become the thing he had always meant for it to be. "I want to leave you with one thought tonight, and then I will let you go. Every person who walks through a door is owed their dignity before they have proven a single thing, before they show you what they have got, before you decide, in that half a second your eyes take, whether or not they belong. Not after, before. That is not only good business, though it turns out to be that too. It is simply what is right. And the strange thing about doing what is right, the thing almost nobody tells you, is that it costs you next to nothing in the moment, and it turns out to be worth everything in the end. Grayson Pruitt had a small dishonest habit that cost him nothing on any given night, right up until the one night it cost him everything he had. And an old doorman named Clarence Boyd kept a 50-year-old wooden bird on a windowsill, and treated strangers with a decency that did him no favors at all, right up until the night it turned out to be the truest thing in the room. You never know which night is the one that counts, so you may as well treat every last one of them like it is. Somewhere out there tonight, right now, somebody is standing at a desk, or a counter, or a doorway, being quietly measured by a stranger and found wanting. Maybe you have been that person. I think most of us have, at least once, in some room we did not choose. Or maybe you have been the stranger, on a tired night, when you were not your best self. Or maybe, and this is the hardest one of all to sit with, maybe you have been one of the decent people in the chairs, watching it happen, feeling in your gut that it was wrong, and saying nothing, because you told yourself it was not your fight. So let me ask you the question this whole story turns on, and I do not want you to answer it for me. I want you to answer it for yourself. Have you ever watched something unjust happen in a quiet room and stayed silent? What was it that held your tongue? And what do you think it would take? What would it actually cost you to be the one who stands up like Clarence Boyd and says the thing out loud next time? Tell me down in the comments. I read them, everyone. And if this story reached something in you tonight, if it put its hand on a place you have been carrying quietly for a long time, then do me one small thing in return. Give it a like so it finds the next person who needs it. Subscribe and stay close, because we tell a true-hearted story like this one every single week. And share it with one person in your life who needs the reminder tonight that they counted all along, that they always did, that not a single sparrow falls without being seen. I will see you in the next one. Take care of each other out there.